Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the emotional impact of the pandemic on families. My name is Kirsty Charlton and I'm a family therapist and a psychologist, and I work in Tees Eskom Wear Valley NHS Trust in secondary care and mental health. Can I just introduce you to the other people who will be doing this webinar with me? Alex Reid, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Alex Reid and I work as a family therapy trainer and supervisor in independent practice. And previously I worked in CNTW Trust as a family therapist for many years and at Northumbria University. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alex Bowler?
Hi, my name's Alex Bowler and I work for the Tees Eskom Wear Valley Trust for early intervention psychosis service as a family therapist.
Thank you. So just to introduce, we've introduced ourselves, and when we're thinking and talking about families today, we're thinking that families can be anything that you deem family to be. So people that you have close connections to, people that you spend a lot of time with, it could be close friends, partners, animals. So we just want you to be aware of that when we're talking about families. And also just a brief thing on self-care. So when we're talking about families, it may stir up some complex feelings for some of you out there. So we just want you to feel free to pause the webinar, to maybe take a break, do whatever you need to manage those feelings. So now I'm going to let Alex take us through the first few slides.
Thank you, Kirsty. The overall aims of the session today are to give a context to the emotional impact of the pandemic on families, and to think a bit about the pileup of stresses that may be traumatizing to families during this strange time. And we also want to offer participants a kind of reflective space to identify how they might support and be supported by one another during this time. So one of the key concepts in thinking about emotional stress and trauma is the notion of resilience. And resilience is simply the capacity to overcome adversity or stress. And when we're thinking about families, family resilience is the capacity in family functioning to withstand and rebound from adversity, to withstand, rebound, or adapt to adversity, you might say. Now, one of the things about the pandemic is that, as Walsh has said, it's a perfect storm of stresses involving crisis, loss events, disruptions in many aspects of our everyday life, and ongoing multiple stresses. And the challenge we face keep evolving as the pandemic progresses. So we want to discuss with you some of the sources of stress, some of the kind of things that have been impacting on families during the period of the pandemic. Now, this list is by no means exhaustive, and you may well be experiencing stresses which aren't listed here, but this is just to kind of give a bit of an overview of many of the stresses that are around. So there's a loss of physical contact with family members and social networks. That's something that we've all experienced keenly, really. The requirement to stay indoors much of the time and to make people safe by not being in physical contact with them has led to a loss of contact and a great sense of missing loved ones. There's been a loss of pre-pandemic ways of life and a loss of sense of normality. And we've all had to make this massive adjustment to this different way of being, this different way of living. And there's a perpetual sense of uncertainty about what's coming next. You know, we've had new strains of the virus and so on coming along. So it's been rather a roller coaster, and our sense of normality has been upended. I mean, many may feel trapped or angry about the circumstances that they find themselves in. For some families, being pushed together has led to different experiences of the relationship, and many positive things have come to the fore, but for many it's also been a kind of pressure cooker experience. And that any kind of pre-existing tensions that might have been around in the family can of course be amplified during this period. There's been a loss of vital roles. I'm thinking of things here such as maybe for grandparents, they've been used to having regular contact with grandchildren, maybe had caring roles, and those roles might have been broken or suspended during this period with a great sense of loss. Loss of employment for some and financial security for many, and for some the pandemic, the financial threat has been existential really, you know, the massive loss of security in terms of finance, and the kind of uncertainty also about what kind of world we're going to emerge into when this is behind us. The possible or actual loss of loved ones, many families will have experienced a bereavement during this period, and the sense of loss, the grief can be compounded because the usual ways of coming together to honour the person who's died have been made complex by the social distancing requirements. Many have had to manage a sense of injustice, that the kind of inequality and the increased risk that some are under, those that live with financial hardship or on conditions of more crowded conditions, or people from Black and minority ethnic communities, we know are at greater risk. So while we're all experiencing this pandemic together in a sense, obviously some people are at much greater risk in the situation than others. So put these things together and we have this kind of pile up of stresses. And so when we think about families and resilience and how we can kind of manage this, I want to just think a little bit about some of the barriers that might be around to adaptation. And one of these in Western culture can often be this kind of idea of the rugged individual who's self-reliant and fiercely independent and who can manage without relying on others. And this can lead to very ordinary feelings of vulnerability or needing one another to feel like weakness. Some may feel that they need to tough it out alone and for fear of being a burden on others. And of course, these kind of notions of the rugged individual can lead to a kind of sense of greater isolation and loneliness, and even burnout, a kind of sense that of depletion of no longer being able to kind of manage resourcefully. So because Kirsty and Alex and I are all from a family therapy background, we bring a kind of family systems perspective to our thinking about the predicament we're in at the moment. And some of the things that a family systems perspective can remind us of is that vulnerability is actually part of the human condition, and that distress is normal in abnormal times. I was speaking to a relative on the phone recently. He was describing feelings of really feeling quite panicky, a person who lives in a very small flat and in a busy city and can't get out that much. And it's important to recognise that these are kind of normal experiences to the circumstances that we're in. The family therapy perspective also reminds us that we are essentially relational beings. Human beings are relational at the core, and that recognition of our mutual dependence on one another is vital to our well-being, that we can't do this alone. And that in turning to others for help, we can pay it back and pay it forward. And what I mean by that is that there's something about asking for help and turning to us for help and giving help to others, that the kind of generosity and sense of mutual aid that arises of that can kind of fan outwards, I think, in a positive way, and kind of strengthen bonds and connections between one another. So as a society, we're all going through this crisis together, and it's important to remember that we all need and depend on each other for our lives and for our future. So before moving on further, there's quite a lot that I've run through in those slides. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not a fully comprehensive list of all of the multiple stresses that we that we encounter as unique families and unique individuals. But I'd like to bring Kirsty and Alex in to see if you want to share any reflections on the slides.
That's
Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alex. I was kind of really thinking about that, you know, trying to deal with things by yourself, and how that sort of really, to me, feels more so when there is a pandemic or when there's a shared difficulty and people feel less able to feel that they can reach out for support just for themselves, because they feel that everybody's in this situation. So, you know, that perhaps they feel a bit like selfish if they're asking for help or reaching out when so many people seem to be needing it. And that
reminds me, Alex, of a conversation I had with somebody, a relative, who said, oh, well, this person's worse than this person, oh, and that person's got this going on, so I don't really want to say about this. And I kind of just said to them, you know, we can't really compare, you know, everybody is suffering or has got something going on, because there is just so much difference and in our lives that, you know, whether we're living alone or whether we're living with a lot of people and we actually want quiet, but if we're alone, we actually wanting to be around people. There's just so much difference. I think comparisons can become unhelpful and maybe stop people from talking and sharing.
Okay, thank you. And so to think a little more about the process of adapting to loss and to crisis, some of the messages really from the kind of family therapy field and the recent literature about family therapy literature about the pandemic. Of course, the literature is very new and really trying to keep up with the evolving kind of situation that we find ourselves in. But some key messages might be that in families, tolerance is needed for different reactions. Each of us responds to stress in very different and unique ways, and sometimes it can be a source of tension when people aren't necessarily reacting to stresses in expected ways. But so that we all respond differently to the kind of stresses that we're facing. Some people might withdraw, or others might be kind of become busier and try and distract themselves and so on. And that adaptation is a kind of complex thing that requires our attention moving back and forth. So we're dealing with the current losses and worries, but also trying to plan for future demands, challenges. In many ways, trying to plan and for challenges which remain rather uncertain to us. I think adaptation also requires what the American family therapist Katie Weingarten described as realistic hope. I think what she means by realistic hope is that hope, if it's unrealistic hope, if we're over hopeful, can become a bit pie in the sky, and that can actually lead to further frustration and disappointment. But realistic hopes about the future, about what might happen next, about how we can plan for the coming weeks and so on, is crucial to our well-being. For some, of course, this isn't for everyone, but for some people, spiritual and religious beliefs may support adaptation. There's a lot of research about resilience and adaptation, saying that a religious faith can be supportive for some in the face of adversity. And for many, music and creative arts can be incredibly supportive. I read recently in the newspaper that the online music streaming services have done very, very well over the past few months. And of course, music can be a great source of comfort to us and reminding us of what's important in our lives. And that, really crucially, that healing and resilience take place gradually over time. So it's one step forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and so on. And it's not that we can kind of be kind to ourselves. I suppose that's the message there. So the resilience takes a lot of time. Now much of the many of the points that have been discussing just now are from this particular reference by WAS, Loss and Resilience in the Time of COVID-19. And there is an information sheet which accompanies the kind of session today, which gives a list of kind of key references from the family therapy literature. So I'm going to switch over to Alex now, and we're going to open up a small sort of period of kind of reflection on some of the points that have been raised in the session. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Alex. We kind of want to be respectful, and knowing that we didn't have an understanding of what everybody that was listening to us would be experiencing. But we still wanted to give some space maybe for people and their families to reflect. So we wondered if perhaps putting some questions together that we had thought had been helpful for ourselves, and putting them and inviting you to have a look at those questions, answer those questions in your own time, in your own space, maybe share them with your family if that was going to be helpful, and to just give some time to those questions as a means of making sense of what's happened, or as a way of reflecting on things for yourselves. So for this part, we wondered about if, say, in 5 years' time or more, you were to look back on 2020 or early 2021, what you might say to some of these questions. We wondered, what would family members or friends have done to have supported each other through that time? So, you know, was there regular phone calls happening? Was there sending children's drawings to one another? Was there more online calls or Zoom quizzes? Or what kind of things might you have been doing, or might your family members and friends have been doing to support each other through the time? We wondered if you kind of asked your family or friends, what had they noticed that you had done to support others, what they might say that you had done. We thought, despite all those difficulties that you might have faced, what would you have said were the best moments for your family? What were the times that you might have appreciated within your family? And we wondered what you might have learnt about yourselves as a family that you continue to think is important to you as a family. So what have you learnt in 2020, early 2021 about your family that continue to have been important to you? And I guess the three of us wondered if it might be helpful if we, as a way of kind of thinking about that question, answered those ourselves a little, or if I invited Alex and Kirsty to think about if any of those questions had resonated for them or had any meaning for them, if they would be happy to share with the audience their thoughts or feelings around that. Would that be okay?
Yes.
Yes, thanks, Alex.
I guess one that I was drawn to was about what family members and friends have done to support each other through this time, because I've heard of and been witnessed and experienced so many different things. Like one of my friends baked a biscuit for her friends. I'm not going to say what it said on it because it's a bit rude, but then she sent it through the post. But it was a really nice gesture saying that she was missing us, basically. Mm-hmm. So that was one thing that I got and received and was like, oh, how lovely. Also things like quiz nights, even though my general knowledge is terrible, but yeah, quiz nights have been set up regularly in order to come together, have a drink as adults, you know, and just have a chat and try and have a bit of fun. I think the best bit of a quiz night for me was when it was a scavenger hunt and they were saying, go and grab this, go and grab that. And we were racing to grab the nearest toilet roll or whatever and bring it back. So yeah, loads of different things really to support each other, especially community. I think in my neighborhood, you know, people have done things like at Easter, we had people put things up in their windows so the children could go on Easter hunts, you know, a bit different to what would usually be done. But also I've noticed that the community have really come together as well as family and friends, which has just been lovely to witness and see.
Lovely. Thanks, Kirsty.
Yes, I suppose the question the questions made me think about how, because what we're facing can feel quite overwhelming, that small acts can actually feel quite significant. And you know, during the first lockdown, I was very struck by how, not always, of course, but often people were very courteous and careful with the kind of social distance that they're making space for one another, and would maybe kind of give a smile or some kind of acknowledgement, you know, and so on. And those tiny things seem very important. And one of the things that was going on for me, I think, was quite a big sense of guilt about family and friends who live alone, who I wasn't able to kind of go and see. And I felt I was letting down in some ways. And so I think things like, you know, making almost daily phone calls, sometimes regular phone calls, short phone calls, just to stay in contact that way, felt very significant. So I've tried to be, I mean, ordinarily with me, I think I'll must ring that person and the days turn to weeks and I still haven't picked up the telephone, but I've tried to be more, you know, better organised around that. And in turn, when I receive little emails from friends or texts or whatever, you know, just staying in contact and stopping the friendships from fading, I'm very touched by that, really. So those are the kind of things that came to my mind.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, I think, you know, that's important to me as well. Is remembering the kind of small acts that can mean a lot. And I think that within our family, we're a family unit of 4. We're all pretty much adults. One's on the verge of adulthood, and we all have different needs. But I think the thing that we've learned as a family is how we've learned to be in tune with each other a bit more, and we've learned to recognize when some people might be experiencing more times of stress or loss, particularly around that loss of identity or what's going on. So different restrictions have different impacts on different members of the family within our unit. And we've kind of really learnt how to be mindful of one another, and maybe do those small acts to help one another through. And I guess that would be the thing that I would hope that, you know, in sort of times when we're not having to worry about the pandemic, that we would still be mindful of one another and still be able to be more in tune with one another about when things are tricky. So
that kind of connect to me, Alex, is something that I think we've learned as a family is about forgiveness. I think we've been a lot more forgiving of each other and just recognizing that when we're maybe a bit snappy, that we are all going through something, and trying to recognize and give more leeway to people, if you like. Just say, yes, this is really hard for us all at different times, like you say, with different reasons, but this is hard. And just be more forgiving and accommodating, I think, to each other, really. And compassion, I think, has definitely been around for us as a family. And my children are very young, so I think for me it's been about, you know, maybe verbally they can't tell me what's going on, but just trying to think about why they are behaving in a particular way and trying to keep in mind that they are still going through it as well at some level, because they're still having lots of changes and disruptions going on. So I think for me, with my children being young who can't verbalize, it's thinking about what might be going on for them and trying to maybe make guesses and think about what is causing their behavior in different times.
Is that okay? Shall we take a pause there? And once again, I just invite you, felt it was helpful to have a look at some of those questions, and invite you to invite your family to have a look at them and have a think together and see some reflections from that. Thank you.